I was at a family gathering shortly before my fall semester of college began. I got to see my cousin Alex, whom I hadn't seen in person for about 2 years at that point. We started talking about what we've been doing over the summer, when he tells me about an encounter that happened to him and his friends back in July. His friend Barry's cousin had inherited his grandfather's house in Virginia after he had sadly died after suffering from colon cancer for almost a year at that point. He invited Barry to come up and visit for the weekend and told him he could bring a few friends. Barry invited my cousin, their friend Troy, and his girlfriend Verlene. They arrived at the house on Friday afternoon and partied that night and went to the water park the next day. They had originally planned on leaving Sunday morning, but since only Barry and Verlene had to work on Monday and didn't have to be in until late at night, they decided to postpone their visit a bit longer and leave at night on Sunday. They left the house at around 6 p.m., and due to traffic and the group deciding to stop off at a diner for dinner, it was about 1 in the morning by the time they got close to the bridge in New Jersey that would take them into New York City. Everyone in the group except Barry lived in a borough off New York City called Brooklyn. Barry, on the other hand, lived in another borough called Staten Island. They had to pass through Staten Island to get into Brooklyn and drop Barry off while passing through. They reached the exit they needed to get off at and began driving up the road, which was essentially a 15-minute straight shot to Barry's house. Shortly into their drive to Barry's house, Troy notices a black vehicle pull out of a parking lot and follow a considerable distance behind them. A few minutes later, the car is still following behind them, and Alex manages to drive past an intersection before the light turned red. Troy saw that the car behind them completely blew through the red light without even slowing down. He told everyone about this, and they told him to relax because it was probably just another late-night commuter. At this point, the road was pretty well lit, but there were next to no cars passing through, and no one walking down the sidewalk at this hour. The car speeds up and follows closely behind them for another few blocks, when all of a sudden it starts flashing red and blue lights. My cousin realized it was an unmarked police vehicle and pulled over to the side of the road and killed the engine. The officer pulls his car over, kills the lights, and gets out of the car. This caused my cousin to get a bit suspicious, as police officers generally don't turn off their lights when they perform a traffic stop. He walks up to the car and Alex rolls down his window. The officer busts out the cliché, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Alex responded saying, "No, sir. I'm not sure why you pulled me over." The officer then said, "I clocked you in at 80 miles per hour, and I noticed you were swerving as well while I was driving behind you." My cousin got extremely suspicious, as he definitely wasn't swerving, and he definitely wasn't driving that fast. He tells the officer there's no way he was doing either of those things, and the officer completely disregards what he was saying and tells my cousin that he was most likely drinking. He tells my cousin to follow him into a parking lot up the block and across the street as he wanted to test him and see if he was drunk. My cousin asked why he didn't just test him right there when he was pulled over, to which the officer tells him to be quiet and do as he says. The officer gets back in his car and slowly passes my cousin. Alex starts the car and backs up reluctantly, following behind him. Everyone kept insisting that something didn't feel right, but Alex was worried they'd get arrested if he was a real cop. The officer begins making a left turn into a parking lot that was behind a store and impossible to see while on the road. My cousin noticed a large black van that was parked eerily close to the entrance of the parking lot on the left side. My cousin was about to turn left into the parking lot when Verlene yelled at him to floor it. She yelled, "Guys, there's someone hiding in that van. We need to go." The streetlights were barely shining on the van, but she managed to notice someone's head sticking out in the back of the van. My cousin decided to take his chances, as the whole ordeal felt completely wrong, and slammed on the gas. While he was driving off, the van quickly spun a U-turn and started following him, but he turned onto a side block and kept making numerous turns despite the fact that he had no idea where he was going, as he wasn't familiar with this area. Eventually, his friends convinced him that he had lost them, and Barry directed him through an alternate route to his house just to be sure that they wouldn't bump into them again. Alex dropped Barry off at his house, and he gave them directions on another way to hop onto the expressway. He ran into his house, and my cousin hauled ass back onto the expressway. Luckily, they didn't bump into the police officer, nor his possible friends again, and managed to get home safely. My cousin shudders to think about what might have happened had Verlene not noticed the guy in the van, and if he hadn't listened to his gut when it was telling him something was wrong. This all happened over the course of a few years. I was around 16 when this first started. I was living at home with my mom in a small town in the UK, and I had just gotten a job at a supermarket 15 minutes walking distance from my house. My mom was a manager there, but we worked different shifts, so I'd often walk to and from work alone. The route I would take to work took me through a back alley behind our house that separates our housing estate from the busy main road. This back alley turns into an opening that is surrounded by trees and bushes. Often, as a kid, I would find dirty needles and beer cans littering the ground amongst the trees, where my friends and me would play hide and seek around there. It became so much of a problem at one point that our housing estate rallied together to clean it all up and cut back the overgrowing weeds, nettles, and bush in the hope our local council would create a safe place for us children to play. It never happened, and over the years it was now right back to how it was, despite all the hopes and effort we put into the neighborhood project. At night, that opening becomes very sinister. There are no lights, and you often feel like something, or more likely someone, is watching you from behind the trees. It was a favorite for drug addicts and drunks, so eventually my mom stopped us from playing around there and would get mad if she ever caught us trying to sneak through the alley. We were curious kids, and would usually find any opportunity to do exactly what our parents told us not to do. But being 16, I was not a kid anymore, and it was the quickest route to work. So it began just as a feeling. I'd walk through the alley and clearing with the sense someone else was there, but I would just put it down to being alone and paranoid. Eventually, after a few weeks of starting my job, I would hear footsteps behind me. Too scared to look, I'd quicken my pace and be out onto the main road before too long. But nobody would ever follow me out, leaving me feeling a little stupid and scolding myself for letting the paranoia play tricks on my mind. That all changed when I actually saw him. I'd finished my shift at 10 p.m., so it was around 1:15 when I got to the alley. I heard the familiar sound of footsteps, but had gotten so used to hearing them and seeing nothing I just ignored it. That was, until I heard him cough. I stole a look and noticed a tall, very stocky man directly behind me. It was so dark I couldn't actually see his features other than the fact he was smiling. I hurried my pace and began to dial my mom's number, but before I knew it I was clear of the alley and onto my main street. I looked behind me one last time and saw the man heading off in the opposite direction. He was wearing old tracksuit bottoms, white scuffy trainers, a jumper, and a white sports cap. When I got home, my mom asked me about the missed call, but I just told her it was an accident and took myself off for a shower and bed. Why I didn't just tell her, I'll never know. Fast forward a few more months. It had become a regular occurrence to see this guy on my way to work, and even on my way home, and a lot of the time he would even follow me up to the supermarket. Me being naive, chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe he was just going to do a bit of shopping. Yeah, it's a bit weird it always seems to be on the days that I'm working, and at the exact time that I happen to be walking to and from work, but it's not as if he's stalking me. Things like that don't happen to girls like me. I eventually started to spot him inside the supermarket, always standing at the ends of the aisles I was working on. He would either pretend he was looking at something on the shelves, or quickly run out of sight. If I was on checkout duty, he He would always choose my till to queue up in, even if others were free and mine was busy. He wouldn't say anything though, just brush my hand when he was handing over money to pay for whatever stupid shit he would queue up for. A bar of chocolate or a tin of baked beans, something he could have easily paid for at self-checkout where it was quicker and easier. I had become increasingly uncomfortable with the number of times I would see him and started to realize that this odd behavior wasn't just coincidence or me being paranoid. He was stalking me. On one particular shift during the day, I noticed him again. I was in the pet aisle stacking tins of dog food. He came over to me and asked me if I had a dog. I said I didn't and turned my back to him. He said that he had a Jack Russell and asked if I liked Jack Russells. I said, yes, I like all dogs, and tried to stand to walk away. He sort of loomed over me and said, "Do you want to come on dog walks with me?" To which I replied, "Not really, thank you. I've got to get back to work," and speedily walked off towards the staff door that leads to the back offices. I bumped into the security guard on the way, who we will call Alex, and quickly began to explain to him what had just happened. What he told me literally made my skin crawl. He said he had been following him around for over an hour. It turns out Freaky Jack Russell guy had been following me too. Everywhere I went, hiding behind the aisles and people so I couldn't see him. If I went into the back to get more stock to replenish the shelves, he would wait around the nearest doors just out of sight and then follow me again. He had even seen him rub his crotch while looking at me. This prompted him to radio the boss to alert him of what was going on, only to look up and he had disappeared. That's when he had gone looking for him, but had bumped into me instead. He told me to go into the back and not to worry. He was going to kindly ask him to leave. From what I have been told, he wasn't so kind, and practically manhandled the guy out of the store while telling him he was barred from ever coming back because he was a creep that got off on stalking 16-year-old girls. After my shift, Alex gave me a lift home, which I was hugely thankful for, as I was pretty shaken up. A few months later, Alex was sacked for stealing some chicken for his dinner. In his defense, a lot of staff did it. They'd pick something from the ready-to-eat counter, like a sandwich or some chicken wings, and would take them straight into the back rather than pay at the tills first. He was just the only one that got caught. Ironic, considering he was supposed to be the security guard. Because of this, they hired a new security guard, and almost instantly I began to see Freaky Jack Russell guy back in the store. Alex being the only one apart from me remembering his face, it's likely he felt it was safe to come back into the store. Only this time he brought his wife and children with him. Every time. So, me being me, too soft for my own good, left him to it and didn't tell anyone about him being back. He would still choose my till to go through and would make a big show of kissing his wife and children. I just ignored him and tried to get the transaction over as soon as I possibly could. And he would often still turn up in the aisles I was working in, but would always have at least one of his children with him, so I didn't say anything. Now at this point, it had been close to 2 years that this had all been happening. I was suffering health issues, so I had to take a lot of time off work. I spent a few weeks in the hospital, and then a further 12 weeks recovering at home. Then I was eased back into work with a couple of shifts per week, only 4 hours long. It was after one of these shifts at around 10:15 p.m. that I happened to be walking through the clearing again. I was about halfway through when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I swear I nearly jumped out of my skin, did a sort of yelp, and spun around to see Freaky Jack Russell guy standing directly behind me, holding a rose. He told me he'd missed me and said he was glad I was better. How'd he know? He commented on the fact that I had lost weight and said he preferred a bit of meat on his women, but that it was okay because he was a good cook and could fatten me up. He then said he was disappointed that I'd gotten new blinds on my bedroom window because it made it harder to see me. Right. Okay. So at this point I've had enough of this guy's bullshit and said, in no uncertain terms, to leave me the fuck alone, or the next time I saw his wife I would tell her everything, and that I'd be paying a little visit to the police station if I ever saw his ugly fucking face again. And then I ran. I ran all the way home and locked the doors and windows behind me. I sat up all night terrified I'd see him outside my bedroom window. But you know what? It worked. I didn't see him again. I quit my job at the supermarket and bought a car so I wouldn't have to walk down any creepy alleys again. Now I'm 26, so it's been a long time since those days. I was at my sister's house having a catch-up and playing with my nieces when she starts to tell me about this guy that had been brought into her work. My sister works in a prison and usually spends her shifts signing new prisoners in and allocating them to their cells. This is an important job because you don't want to put a murderer in with a pedophile. Things could get ugly. Scratch that. You do want to do that, but it would cost her job, so you basically can't. Anyway, this guy that had been brought in was in for stalking, assault with a deadly weapon, and rape. She said she recognized him instantly. When she used to work at the same supermarket petrol station I worked at, he had followed her home on more than one occasion, until she finally moved out and never saw him again. My sister is 9 years older than me. She said that she had read the details of the case after allocating him to his cell, and had gotten his full name to search a photo of him on Facebook to show me. It was him, Freaky Jack Russell guy. He had been following this 17-year-old girl for a while, and she had reported it to the police, but they did nothing. This girl had seen him outside her house and on the way to and from work. She worked at a different supermarket than I did, a half an hour from my house. After a particularly late shift, the girl was walking around the back of the store towards the bus stop when somebody grabbed her from behind. He held a knife to her throat and sexually assaulted her right there on the wet, cold concrete, right near a main road, but just out of sight so no one could see. After he finished, he kissed her, told her he loved her, and tossed a rose at her feet before leaving toward the bus stop. The girl watched him sit patiently at the bus stop and actually wait for his bus as if he had done nothing wrong. Then, after he got on the bus, he waved at her. Actually waved at her. That guy is another kind of messed up. She rang her mom, who rang the police. They caught him through CCTV images and DNA, and now he's locked up for 6 years. The thing is, could I have stopped this from happening if I'd just rang the police and told them what was happening to me? Would it have discouraged him from taking it that step further and actually hurting someone? I do blame myself sometimes. I know that guy is a monster, and I can't help but wonder if he ever touched those kids of his. After all, I wouldn't put it past someone who is as deluded as this guy, but I can't help but be grateful that it didn't happen to me. He did have a rose that night he spoke to me in the alley. Was he planning on doing those depraved things to me? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to get early access to all of my content, as well as some other cool perks, make sure you go check out my Patreon page. It's a cool way for you guys to get perks and help out the channel. And it is greatly appreciated. I hope everyone has a great day, night, evening, morning, whatever time it is when you're listening to this. And I hope everyone stays safe out there. And I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, It's always scarier if it's true.